Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you are all doing well on this lovely Sunday afternoon. So, I thought today I will speak. So I just realised I'm a little bit dark. Today I thought I would speak about something which has come up a couple of times over the last couple of weeks in my work, and was a request from somebody to do a couple of weeks ago, and that's what to do when you've got really different parenting styles to your partner, like husband, but not exclusively. When the two of you have just got different parenting styles and how to manage that. And I've just been sitting down this morning just thinking about it and just making some notes, and it made me realise I've touched on this when I did the video last week or 2 weeks ago, thinking about compromises and how the things that we kind of like the three kind of like hot points that couples disagree over are finances, parenting, and sex. So I said I'd go into this one in a little bit more detail because it feels really relevant at the moment, and it's relevant for various different reasons, but mostly I suppose because we've all been kind of cooped up together, haven't we, over the last few months, and that's why I think particularly this one has come up quite a lot in my client work, and also with my friends as well. I know that this is quite a hot topic. And these things come up when you are both parent to your children, but also come up, not all the time, but can come up really frequently as well if you are a blended family. So I thought I would just start by just really kind of going over the basics, if you like, and thinking about where we start and where our values come from. And if, to any of you guys that have been watching these videos regularly, you'll know that I talk a lot about what we learn as children, what we learn growing up, and what we then bring into our adult life. And parenting is absolutely no different. I think the really tricky thing about parenting is that we can like when couples first get together and meet and kind of fall in love and agree to spend the rest of their lives with each other, how you're going to raise your children doesn't really tend to come up as a point of conversation. It might do, but it often doesn't. And so a lot of parenting issues, and I think they don't come up in conversation because a lot of parenting issues, to any of you guys watching who are parents, you know that you don't sometimes consider these things until you're actually a parent. And one thing that I really hold my hands up to very, very much, and I talk about it with my friends often, is that we can all have really, really, really interesting ideas about how we're going to raise our children and what that's going to look like, and what kind of what's going to be our like discipline kind of strategies and stuff like that. And then you end up having children, and often it just goes completely out the window because that's life. I had some very interesting like obviously safe and sound ideas about parenting, and then once I became a parent myself, I thought, gosh, what a pile of rubbish that was. I do it completely differently. And that's okay. As long as you're not hurting your children, then you find your own way, and you bend and bow as you need to, as they grow, as you grow. And I mean, when I used to do parenting work as a social worker many years ago, the old adage that children don't come with a handbook. I mean, like, there are loads and loads of books on it, but I mean, obviously, they don't come with a handbook. But the thing is, what's so unique about parenting is that you don't know when you first give birth to a child, you don't know how you're going to parent them when they're a toddler. You don't know how you're going to parent them when they're a teenager. Like you are learning on the job. You are 100% learning on the job. And then it can be easier then with the second or the third because you've done it already. But as far as your firstborn is concerned, you don't know how to parent that age group until you're actually parenting that age group. So it's a learning process. And this is what's so interesting about parenting. And this is why I think some conflict can come up quite easily, is that when you and your partner, like husband, wife, like however that unit is made up, you don't know it until you've done it, but you bring your own stuff to the table. So how you were parented as a child will very, very much inform how you then go on to be a parent. Now, I don't want to kind of like make it too complicated. Essentially, you will do it pretty similarly. There will be times when you think, I absolutely, definitely don't want it to be like this. And then you are able to then make a really conscious effort. So it's not like saying you will parent your children the way that you were parented as a child. That I mean, there's an element of truth to that, but that's oversimplistic because, you know, most of my clients, most of them, I would say, have taken parts of their parenting, how they were parented as a child, and want it to be significantly different. So it's not to say that these patterns always repeat. But I think in the main, and this is why it gets so interesting, because you don't consider these things until you are a parent. And often we do things as a parent that we're not consciously deciding. We just kind of do stuff. And then it's only if it either goes wrong or it's a source of conflict in your relationship that you then have to kind of sit down and kind of analyse it and work it out. But in the main, they're rules, aren't they? They're the rules that we grow up with. They're the rules that this is just kind of how it always was. Like, this isn't really a parenting issue, but like something that I was talking about with my husband and my neighbours a few weeks ago is like most, I don't know whether it's most families. Is it most families? A lot of families, let's just say a lot of families, have a Sunday roast on Sunday lunchtime. Because that's just kind of how it always was. And, you know, my lovely neighbour doesn't even think about it. It's just like Sunday is Sunday roast day. I never grew up with Sunday roasts. So it's never been a thing for me. And yet it couldn't not be a thing for her. Now, I know that's a bit random, but it's just to kind of like say that we do these things without even often really thinking about it. So when it comes to disagreeing over parenting and having very different parenting styles, how do you kind of maneuver through that? How do you work that out? I'm glad that made you chuckle. How do you work that out? Because ultimately this is down to communication, and it's about, you know, I mean, being in a relationship, being in a partnership, in a marriage, or, you know, however your family unit is made up, is always about communication, right? That's ultimately what it's all about, and it's about what we bring into it. And as I said, you know, you'll know that I talk about this all the time. The theme of my videos is always very similar, because the theme of my work is very similar and my beliefs are very similar, which is that we grow up and our childhood basically informs who we are as adults, and we can't escape that. That's our very core being. But it doesn't mean that it always has to be like that, and it doesn't mean that it's right. And that's the bit that I find really interesting, is that we can have these habits and we can have these beliefs, but that doesn't mean that it's set in stone. And quite often, this is always really interesting, quite often people can demonstrate parenting strategies or parenting beliefs, even though they didn't like it themselves growing up, even though they might not want to be that parent themselves, but they end up doing it anyway because they don't really know any differently, or they're kind of fixed in that position, and they don't want to bend and flex, and that's always very fascinating. Do parents always have the same kind of? Do people who are who are in love and have similar shared values always have similar parenting strategies? Often they do, but quite often they don't, which I know sounds like a silly contradiction. So it's about what's important to you. It's about understanding what's important to you and why it's important to you. And that's that I think is kind of like the bit that I want to concentrate on today, because that's the bit that I think is most informative as to who we are as adults. So ideally, as I said, you would have these conversations right at the beginning. So you kind of have this kind of shared value. But as I said, you don't know this until you actually have children, and you don't know how it's actually going to be. And one of you might be a bit of a soft touch, and one of you might be really quite inflexible and quite firm. And in my experience, and I'm not saying that this is how it is, but in my experience, I think that's where couples tend to disagree and argue, is if one of them has a much more gentle approach and the other one has a much firmer approach. And then, because like we know, don't we? I mean, this is it. We know as parents that the most important thing, I think, I'll probably contradict myself or add a few more most important things over the course of the next half hour or so. But the most important thing is consistency. Consistency is the absolute bottom line, I think, when we are raising children. And so if you've got one parent who has one kind of parenting style and another one who has a very different kind of parenting style, that just creates a complete headache, because it creates tension between mum and dad. I'm just doing this as kind of like a genetic heterosexual married couple, so I don't mean to offend anybody by saying mum and dad, but mum and dad, or stepdad, or mum. So if you've both got very different parenting styles, it can't be consistent. And then if it's not consistent, you're arguing between the two of you as parents, and then the children are then picking up on that, and then they are then either confused themselves because they don't understand what the rules are, or as they get older, they understand what the rules are, and then they start playing you off against each other and manipulating. Or manipulating is a really horrible word, but kind of like playing you off against each other, which is completely understandable, because they've got the room to do that, because there's this whole great big vast, keep it in the screen, great big space between the firm parent and the flexible parent. So what would be ideal in this kind of situation would be to first of all find out your values and find out what actually is. And you need to do this, obviously, when the kids aren't around. Find out what is really important to you as a parent. What are the rules that are kind of these are the rules that I feel really strongly about, and these are the reasons why I feel really strongly about them. So let's say, for example, okay, so this is a really easy one. This is really personal to me, but I know that this is something that comes up with my friends and my clients, and sleeping, bedtime sleeping, right? And I know there's somebody on here who's watching who's going to actually, two people on here who's going to really relate to this. So my children both bed shared, and my youngest still bed shares now, and she's 4, and it drives my husband absolutely crazy. But that's just how it is. I'm the one who, for the last 7 years, has got up every single night in the middle of the night. And I'm the one who gets affected by lack of sleep if I'm up with the children. And also, I believe in having a very close bond with my children. And that means at any time that they are upset, I am there for them and I will comfort them. Even if I'm angry with them, I will still comfort them if they are sad. So at night time, which is pretty much like the most vulnerable time of the day, if they are upset or they are, even not even upset, if they just want a cuddle and they want to have that connection, then they come and have that connection. It's just like that's something that's actually a non-negotiable for me. Dave really hates it because Dave's a really, really, really bad sleeper. He doesn't get much sleep anyway. He's always really tired. And he thinks, like a lot of other parents do, and there's no judgment on it. I'm only picking this because this is something that is like in real life for me. He thinks that mummy and daddy's bed is mummy and daddy's bed, and the children's beds are their beds, and that's all there is to it. And I've got friends who have got that, believe that too, and that's absolutely fine. I've got no judgment on that. I just don't agree with it, and that's just non-negotiable for me. So, when we were talking about compromises a couple of weeks ago, the compromise with that was that I have a bed guard at my side of the bed, and then any children that come into the bed sleep there so that they are not, because what he really hates is he hates being kicked in the middle of the night by children, which is completely fair enough. I mean, occasionally I kick him when he's snoring, but that's something completely different. He doesn't want children's arms and legs flying everywhere and kicking him. So the compromise for that was, I'm the one that's sleeping next to them. They're at the bed guard. You're not being touched. That's how it is. Our 4-year-old now probably only does it 3 nights a week, maybe. She's winding down. She's starting to sleep through the night properly. And at the time when she's sleeping through the night, she obviously gets a reward. I'm totally going off subject here. She gets a couple of Smarties in the morning for being a good girl and sleeping in her own bed all night. But actually, I know that it's nothing to do with the fact that I know that if she doesn't get into our bed in the middle of the night, it's because she slept all the way through. She won't settle herself back to sleep. She'll just come in for a cuddle. She doesn't cry, she just wants a cuddle. And I'm completely cool with that. She still gets a reward anyway, because I want to reinforce the good behaviour for sleeping in her own bed. But if she doesn't, it's not a big deal and it doesn't bother me. Totally off tangent. I've completely gone off. But the point I'm trying to make is that there are things that you will have in your relationship as parents that are non-negotiable, and you will have things that you can compromise on. Being able to talk that through with each other and being able to work out why you have the beliefs that you do, and are they worth sticking to? Like, are they, if you've got like a really shouty parent, let's just say, this is another really interesting one in my house, because I'm a really loud person, but I'm not a shouty person. And so sometimes my husband thinks that I'm shouting, but I'm not actually shouting. My voice is just elevated. I know that sounds really silly, but honestly, that's just how it is. Whereas he's really, really, really calm and quite passive. But then when he gets pissed off, we'll then start shouting. And then I really don't like that. I really don't like that. I don't like the children being shouted to like that. It doesn't happen very often, but just occasionally when it happens. So that's the conversation for us to have, is around, how we kind of like negotiate volume. And this is what comes up with couples quite a lot, is that you'll have one that's that is the disciplinarian, and you'll have the other one that's a lot more of the calm. And it mixes and matches. There's no it's not always the dad that's shouty, and it's not, it varies, but. And that's okay. This is it, because what we're talking about is disagreeing over parenting. This isn't a talk about how to parent your children. I trust that all of you are able to parent your children. Well, as a social worker, not all parents are great at parenting their children, to be fair. But most parents the overwhelming majority of parents parent their children absolutely well. This is about whether or not you disagree with the parenting and how you manage that if you disagree. I'll get to the point eventually. So talking about it with each other, understanding your own parenting style and understand what you have brought from your own childhood experiences and why you parent the way you do, I think is essential. Because we don't know until we know, right? We don't parent children until we become parents of children. And only at that point do we then start to realise what works and what doesn't work. And the thing is that even if you disagree with a parenting strategy, that's okay. You can do things differently and you can do things wrong, right? I mean, we all get it wrong sometimes. Like, we all get it wrong sometimes. No judgment here on that at all. But then what's interesting is then how do you manage that? And this is where often couples trip up. And this is where step families, blended families, can at times find it quite difficult too. It's how does that then get managed? And does that get managed in front of the children? Or is that something that you have managed to keep until that conversation, until the children are out of earshot or like in bed or something? Because if you disagree with your partner's parenting style in front of the children, you're basically undermining that parent. Now, that you might be okay with that. I struggle with that. I'm hesitating, so I'm just thinking whether or not I do that. Well, I suppose I do that, if I'm really honest, because I tell him off for shouting if he shouts, because I don't like it. But essentially, if there was something that either of us did that the other person didn't agree with, then we would absolutely not talk about that in front of the children, because that just doesn't feel like that's not okay to do that, right? These conversations need to be done. You need to, it comes back to the consistency thing again. You need to be able to show up as a united front. And in order to show up as a united front, those disagreements need to happen away from the children. Being a consistent parents doesn't mean that you have to agree on everything all of the time. There are obviously going to be times where you don't agree in what you're doing. And there will be times when the kids are able to play on that a little bit. And they will play on it because that's kind of what they do. They're learning while we're learning. So everybody's learning. That's a really interesting thing about parenting, is that we're all kind of learning as we go. And I know, does anybody remember, just thinking about what I was saying earlier, does anybody remember Dr. Tanya Bryant from the House of Tiny Tearaways? Do you remember that? And she did that program, and this is what I was saying right at the beginning about how I had these really interesting ideas about parenting, and then I became a parent myself and thought, what the hell? Like, everything that I've been talking about for however many years is absolute rubbish. But I can remember reading an interview with her about how, because she used to do a lot around sleep training, and this whole kind of like let them cry it out thing, which I've absolutely just breaks my heart, to be honest with you. But she used to do it. And then when she became a parent herself, I remember reading the interview and her saying like, she just had absolutely no idea how utterly devastating it was, and that she doesn't do it herself, which I just thought was really interesting. I think that was what she'd said anyway. And so even the top kind of clinical psychologists get it wrong. And that's that's absolutely how it is. She also used to do time out, and time out is another really interesting one that parents can disagree on quite a lot, because this whole thing around putting a child, like most people use the bottom step, like if they've got stairs in the house and not in a flat, they will use time out to help their children kind of cool down. And that's another really interesting one, because there are some parents who absolutely swear by that. And then there are other parents who really hate the idea of sending a child out to be punished, like ostracizing them. I'm not turning this into a parenting talk. This is just not what this is about. So that's the kind of conversation that's really interesting to have. If that's something that you both feel really strongly about, but in completely different ways, then how are you going to manage that situation when it happens and the child not get caught up in that confusion? Because that's ultimately a really confusing... That's the kind of situation where emotions are really high at the time between one parent and one child, and then you add another parent coming into the mix. Sorry, that sun's just absolutely blinding me. And then you add another parent into the mix who disagrees with that, and then it kind of then it just kind of it escalates, and it can get really confusing. So I think basically what I'm trying to get over is that parenting is about consistency and communication. And if you can communicate and you can be consistent, then you've got it nailed. Like, anybody who says to me that they're having really like big parenting disagreements, that's the two things that we'll kind of check on. And it's very different if you've got, like, I'm just trying to think, I'm thinking about a friend of mine, and I'm also thinking about two ladies that I'm working with at the moment. So I've got three ladies that I know very well, where the husband is away quite a lot of the week, working away for whatever reason, and then it all kind of goes to pot when the husband comes home, because the mum's established all the rules. It's got this whole kind of system down, and then, so I'll just keep this really simple. So one of the three that I'm talking about was an army wife, and I'm using that one in particular because her husband was, obviously being in the army, a really strict disciplinarian, and she wasn't. She still had quite tight rules and boundaries, but they were very different to his. And so she kind of ran her ship like 4 or 5 days a week, like smooth running. And then husband would come back and start kind of like exerting his control quite heavily, and his authority. It didn't work. It caused absolutely loads of conflict, loads of confusion, and loads of upset. I don't think I'm breaking any massive confidences here. They didn't end up staying together because it was just all. I mean, there was that. It wasn't just because of that. Obviously, there was other stuff going on. But that's what do you do when you've got one parent who absolutely just doesn't want to bend and flex at all? Because parenting is about relationships. Forget parenting. Relationships are about bending and flexing. Being able to communicate your values is so important. But actually being able to compromise is also really important. So if you've got... And that's why it's really important that you understand. So I could repeat myself, but just for anybody that kind of like missed the beginning, it's so important to understand why you've got those rules, why you've got those boundaries, why you've got those parenting strategies. The likelihood is that that's what you had growing up. I've caveated it, but I'm not going to go back over again. The likelihood is that that's what you've had growing up. or that's how you had it growing up and you want to do it, you want to do it differently. But these are the stories that come with you through life. And that's why you need to be able to talk about it and understand it, because until you're able to share that experience, you're never really going to be on the same page together. I mean, let me just make a big assumption here that most parents want to stay together and want to have a happy, calm family home, right? Not always. I understand that, not always. But let's just say like 80% of the time, parents, mum, dad, family unit want to stay together. So nobody wants to invite conflict into their home for no reason at all. So being able to sit down, understand why you've got the rules or why you've got the values around parenting that you do have, why you want to discipline in this way, why you want to do bedtime in this way. Like, does everybody have to finish their dinner before they can have pudding? Like, do they? Are you allowed to get up from the table until the last person's finished? Like, okay, they're trivial, but, you know, once you start saying, well, that's just how it was in my house, and so that's how it is. It's like, okay, that's fine. If you feel really strongly bonded to that, then that's okay. But if you think, well, that's how it was when I was growing up, but yeah, actually thinking about it, it doesn't really make much sense and it's not really that necessary, then you know where it's come from and you know its value and you know whether you want to keep it or ditch it. But to have that conversation so that you can both be consistent is so important, because without the consistency, you've got chaos. Oh, isn't that lovely? I've just made that up just now. Without consistency, you've got chaos. I think I might make that my new strapline. Have I covered everything? No arguing in front of the kids. Well, try not to argue in front of the kids anyway, because I really hate that. But don't try not to have parenting disagreements in front of the kids, because that just isn't helpful. Can you write me any comments if you think I've missed anything out? I know that I've got a few people here that are watching. I don't know whether they're not showing up on the numbers. I've got a few people. I think that's pretty much about it, unless you're going to tell me otherwise. As always with these videos, please send me new ideas. I've still got a few left from some suggestions that were given to me over the past few weeks, but I'm really interested in any of your relationship issues or anything that you want me to talk around. Dreams and goals and affirmations, law of attraction, self-worth, self-confidence, communication, parenting we've done, compromising we've done. So, you know, keep the ideas coming to me. I'm happy to go over any of them in any more detail. I will be back here on Wednesday. I will confirm what time later, and I hope that's helpful to you. And have a lovely rest of day. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Take care.